This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Climate change dominates talks among world leaders at the UN General Assembly. Taliban founders say strict punishment amputations set to return to Afghanistan. And Libya's head of the Presidency Council warns of possible conflict if credible elections are not held in December. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the next 30 minutes. Oil prices are holding near the highest level since 2018 amid a global energy supply crunch. And Nigeria is considering more debt sales after a $4 billion Eurobond sale. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. Well, the latest is that we begin in New York, where leaders from across the world continue to address the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Among those scheduled to give their speeches this Friday are leaders from Nigeria, Senegal, Gambia, Benin, and South Sudan. For the very latest, let's go to John Terrett, who's standing by for us in New York. John, good to see you. What can you tell us about what's happening at the UN this Friday and what is still to come?
Thank you. It's always great to be on the program, and we're coming to the end of this UN General Assembly now. It does actually continue on Saturday and on Monday, but it feels as if we're getting towards the end. And today, very much a day for Africa. In the hall of the General Assembly, we've already heard from Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria. We've also heard from Macky Sall of Senegal. We've heard from Gambia, from Benin. We've just been listening to the speaker from South Sudan, who is the Vice President, Rebecca Nyandang, and also Mauritius to come as well. So Africa very much represented here today at the General Assembly. And I wanted to tell you, because we are broadcasting mainly to Africa now, that within the past 24 hours, we had a very, very important food systems summit. Now, what is a food systems summit? Well, it was a huge event here. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, spoke at it via a virtual contribution. It sits within the 17 goals of the sustainable development effort that the UN has going on. And there are some very lofty ambitions for this particular UN project. School meals for everybody, zero food waste throughout the world, and a new food mission, which is really based upon how we grow food, where we grow it, particularly in countries that have extreme drought and extreme flooding, and also to do with the distribution of food around the world as well in a more equitable way. Now, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said that food is a right shared by all, and he said we must rethink how we see the value of food. So I thought that was particularly relevant to Africa. And then today, the big set piece here today at the General Assembly, even though the speeches continue in the General Assembly Hall, the big set piece event is to do with women and girls in Afghanistan. And this is being held in conjunction with the organization UNICEF and the Malala Yousafzai Fund. You know Malala from Afghanistan in the past. Now, this is a very, very high level meeting. It is aimed at the future of women and girls in Afghanistan, and in particular their education. Now, as you know, women and men in Afghanistan under the Taliban have now been separated, and there are very real doubts about the future of women's education at all and the future of women's work in Afghanistan. So this high-level meeting is designed to try and look at what the fallout will be for Afghanistan if women are not given a proper education alongside men. And they say at this event, some of the publicity for this event talks about Afghan women being the most talked about in the world right now, but also at the same time the least listened to. So those are the key events here at the UN General Assembly on this sunny day in New York City.
And we do hope to be speaking about Afghanistan later on in the program. But for now, John, what are you hearing about the Quad Security Summit?
Well, the issue of the Quad, you're talking about the Quad in Washington, D.C., I think, aren't you? Because what's happened is that as we come to the end of the week, the speeches go on in the General Assembly Hall, but the emphasis tends to move over to things that are taking place, as we say here, on the sidelines. And so yesterday there was another very, very high profile meeting of the Security Council, which is very pertinent to Africa, where they were looking at the issue of climate change and conflict in the world. But I did tell you all about that on yesterday's program. So what's happened now is that the sideline has shifted away from the UN altogether and down to Washington, D.C., because meeting there within the next hour will be members of the Quad, and it's a new strategic alliance for the Indo-Pacific region. It involves the countries of Australia, Japan, the United States and India. So attending their first in-person, face-to-face meeting at the White House today will obviously be President Joseph Biden, but also the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, Scott Morrison, who's the Australian Prime Minister, and Narendra Modi, who is the Indian Prime Minister. And in a virtual meeting that they held back in March, they've already agreed that the things that they will concentrate on include the distribution of vaccines throughout the Indo-Pacific region, security in that region, cyber security included in that, by the way, and of course the issue of free trade within the Indo-Pacific region. Now, it is being seen, generally speaking, as an anti-China rising pact, and one that could be quite influential in the future, particularly for India, which is the only one of those countries that actually shares a border with China. And of course it comes immediately after the signing of that AUKUS pact between the UK, the United States and Australia, which will end up in getting Australian nuclear-powered submarines for them to patrol their seas for the very first time. And that has so outraged the French, who lost a contract, and of course China, which is outraged about having Australia using nuclear, they're not nuclear armed, but they are nuclear powered submarines in their back garden, as it were. So that's the focus of the day, really, apart from what's happening here, the Quad talks getting underway in the next hour in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much for all that. John Starrett speaking to us from the UN General Assembly in New York. Well, leaders of the United States, Japan, India and Australia, as we just heard, are to soon meet in person as a group for the first time on Friday. Their discussions cover a wide range of issues. Sean Calebs has the details.
Washington is gearing up to host member nations of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, known simply as the Quad. In this time of the pandemic, it will feature rare face-to-face meetings here in the United States with leaders from Australia, India, and Japan. While the name of the organization carries the word security, this is not a military group. This meeting is about a host of wide-ranging issues. U.S. President Joe Biden wants to lead the group in discussions on COVID vaccinations, especially for poorer nations, ongoing issues regarding climate change, finding a way for the four countries to team up on cybersecurity, as well as the dramatically changing political landscape of Afghanistan. But topping the list will be discussions about China's continued growth and what some nations see as a concern about maritime navigation through the South China Sea. China is growing and, in the process, is becoming much more powerful and strong. Although China has never done anything to disrupt commerce going through the South China Sea, the U.S. is especially concerned because somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 trillion worth of U.S. trade flowed through the region back in 2019. China and the United States have also seen their relationship suffer. Former U.S. President Donald Trump engaged in a costly tit-for-tat trade war with China during his 4 years in office. And relations have not thawed since Biden took office. While all member nations of the Quad have their differences with China, the group supports cooperating where they can on such issues as climate change and aggressively competing in other sectors such as new technology. China has had its issues with the Quad, most recently saying in reality India, Japan and Australia are simply pawns for the United States, essentially doing Washington's bidding. The Quad actually grew out of the horrific 2004 Asian earthquake and tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands of people in the Indo-Pacific. And even with so much of its focus now on China, there is no question that the organization is still developing. Sean Calebs, CGTN in Washington.
climate change continues to dominate talks at the UN's General Assembly. African leaders have pointed out the need for more action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Speaking at the Assembly, the leaders emphasized that climate action has now become a matter of survival. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
In his pre-recorded speech before the UN General Assembly, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa emphasized that the world has reached a pivotal moment to tackle climate change.
Climate change is an existential crisis for the entire world, yet poor countries are particularly vulnerable. Although we bear the least responsibility for causing climate change, African countries are among those that carry the greatest burden and cost.
Zimbabwean President Emmanuel Mnangagwa identified climate change as one of the greatest challenges that the Southern African nation is facing.
My country and the parts of Southern African region continue to experience the devastating impacts of climate change, ranging from cyclone-induced floods, recurrent droughts, and the shorter rain seasons.
Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan called for action in fulfilling the Paris Climate Change Agreement.
Our actions today determine the future of our planet in terms of climate change. And in this regard, I call for transparent modality for financial disbursement and emphasize that developed countries should fulfill their commitment to contribute $100 billion annually by 2025 so as to facilitate the implementation of the Paris Agreement.
Uganda is also struggling to cope with the impact of climate change.
Uganda, just like most countries, continues to experience biodiversity loss to the extent that some wildlife and other living species are now in danger of extinction.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the effects of climate change are displacing more and more people worldwide.
Last year, more than 30 million people were displaced by climate-related disasters. 90% of refugees come from countries that are among the most vulnerable and least able to adapt to the effects of climate change. Many of these refugees are in turn hosted by countries that are also suffering the impacts of climate change, compounding the challenge for host communities and national budgets.
The struggle to tackle global warming and end ocean degradation continues to be Africa's highest priority. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Meanwhile, the British government has been criticized by the UN for its failure to address colonial-era crimes committed in Kenya. Last month, 6 UN special rapporteurs wrote to the UK government expressing concern over its failure to provide effective remedies and reparations to the Kipsigis and Talai people. CGTN's Enoch Sequoia has that report.
When 97-year-old Kibore Cheruyot was born in 1924, the scramble for Africa was on, and Kenya was under the British protectorate. This picture of him and others while in detention, a constant reminder of the atrocities he endured in the hands of colonialists.
They had soldiers who killed our people, tortured us and raped our mothers, children and wives and took our livestock.
He came from the ruling Talai clan of Kenya's Kipsigis community, which had fertile land and lots of cattle.
So you want to tell me where we are now used to be the ancestral land of the Kipsigis community before the British came?
Yes, I think you have seen across that area where it's high ground. That is my ancestral land where my grandfather, my father and my families used to live. People used to live as clans.
That was until the British arrived.
The record shows that in 1902 they introduced the Ground Land Ordinance, which actually made them to be the rightful owners of our soil. And that time they say that this part of the land was no longer ours, that we were to move to the native reserves.
The communities were forced out of their 36,000 hectares of fertile land in Kericho County, south of Kenya's Rift Valley region, to give way to white settlers who set up tea plantations there. Decades later, this land is still occupied by British and multinational tea corporations.
You know, you are just seeing other people using your soil.
You want to tell me that as the Kipsigis community, you haven't been benefiting from these lands?
The proceeds from these farms go direct to the shareholders, who in this case are the British.
But after fighting for their voices to be heard for years, their cry has caught the attention of the United Nations. A report by 6 UN Special Rapporteurs has concluded that the action by the British violated the rights to privacy, family life and property of the people of the communities. Kericho County Governor Professor Paul Chepkoni, who is a member of the Kipsigis community, has been at the forefront of this battle.
And they must know that they are occupying this land illegally. This land was stolen. The other responsibility is now for the UK government, because they took the land contrary to provisions of international law, and they need to compensate people and apologize.
The victims have died, but they have their children. The children are suffering because of what happened to the old men and old women.
There is a strong belief here that justice will eventually be served in the long run. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Kericho, Kenya.
We turn our attention to Afghanistan now, where extreme penalties such as executions and amputations will resume in the country. That's according to the Taliban's former head of religious police, Mullah Nuruddin Turabi. Turabi is now in charge of prisons and says amputations are necessary for security. However, the Taliban says the extreme penalties will not be carried out in public as they had been under previous Taliban rule in the 1990s. Since the Taliban took over control of Afghanistan last month, they've been promising a milder form of rule than their previous tenure. However, since August, several human rights organizations have reported various abuses carried out across Afghanistan. Well, for more on this latest development, we're now joined again by John Terrett, who's in New York on the sidelines of the UN. John, thank you again for joining us on the program. Let's speak about this issue of Afghanistan. You did touch on it a little bit before when we spoke, but you're at the UN, have been following various important discussions there. Has there been any mention and reaction from the UN General Assembly to this announcement from the Taliban?
Well, I think it's caused quite a bit of shock, actually. I mean, on the one hand, I suppose it's understandable. On another hand, I think here people are rather revolted by it. The Taliban has asked the United Nations if it can address the UN General Assembly. And at the moment, we don't know what the answer to that will be. Now, the thing about addressing the UN General Assembly is that you have to be a member of the United Nations. Afghanistan is a member of the United Nations, but of course the new government is untested. It's an interim administration. We're not entirely sure exactly who's in charge in various positions. And the whole process within the United Nations, there's a whole committee that decides whether a country is eligible not only to be a member based on lots of things, including its human rights record, and then whether they're even eligible to address the United Nations General Assembly. Now, my example beyond Afghanistan, as it stands at the moment, is Myanmar. Now, Myanmar, as you know, is currently run by the military, and my understanding is that America, and indeed I think China, have deferred a decision on Myanmar being able to address the UN General Assembly and its future as a member country until a few weeks or months from now. So it doesn't basically affect this particular General Assembly. Now, regarding the Taliban, there are really two schools of thought here. One is that this is just a revolting notion, that the Taliban, given their human rights record, particularly their treatment of women and girls and minorities, and all the other atrocities that we've seen associated with them from their time in power between 1996 and 2001, 2002, And even the things that they have done, despite the fine words that they have come up with since they took power about 5 weeks ago. On the other hand, and my understanding is that the Secretary General has half a mind in this direction, on the other hand, if the United Nations allows them, as the current government of Afghanistan, to address the assembly here, either tomorrow, Saturday, or on the last day on Monday, maybe, just maybe, the UN will have some invaluable leverage over the Taliban, which it would not have otherwise. So those are the real two schools of thought. Well, really three. One, revulsion at the notion because of their human rights policies. Two, the fact that it's very, very late in the day for a formal decision to be made. But three, would it help in the long run if they were allowed to have their say here? Would that allow some leverage from this global organization into all sorts of areas that this organization wants to be involved with in Kabul and in Afghanistan? And of course, finally, the Afghanistan ambassador to the United Nations, who was appointed by Ashraf Ghani but now finds himself marching to a different drumbeat, is in a very, very difficult situation.
Thank you so much for that. John Starrett speaking to us from the UN General Assembly in New York. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping has hailed the potential of science and technology in tackling major global issues. President Xi was addressing the opening ceremony of a special event aimed at boosting technological innovation in China. The 5-day Zhongguancun Forum is considered one of China's most important international events in this field.
Now more than ever, there's the need for countries to intensify open cooperation and innovation in science and technology and work together to explore pathways and solutions to important global issues, meet the challenges of our times, and advance humanity's lofty cause of peace and development. China sets great store by science, technology, and innovation, and is committed to enhancing global collaboration on this front. It will strengthen relevant international exchanges with an even more open mind, actively engage in global innovation networks, and join in the global efforts to advance basic research, promote the commercialization of scientific and technological achievements, and foster new drivers of economic development.
President Xi went on to say that China would work harder in intellectual property protection and create a first-rate environment for innovation. He said China supported the tech for good concept, or the idea that technology should only be used to make the world a better place. The Zhongguancun Forum was launched in 2007 with a general focus on innovation and development. This year's event is centered on the theme intelligence, health, and carbon neutrality. Hundreds of Chinese and foreign enterprises will be showcasing their latest products and services over the coming days. Our reporter Yang Shenshan has more from the venue in Beijing.
The forum is held in Beijing's northern part. Actually, it is home. It is known as China's Silicon Valley because it is home to numerous leading Chinese IT companies like Tencent and Baidu, as well as many high-tech startups. Actually, the forum was established since 2007, and after many years, it has developed into an international platform for science and technology exchanges and cooperation. This year, over 60 events and seminars are going to be held here to discuss the topics like artificial intelligence, health, and carbon neutrality. Take artificial intelligence, for example. Actually, it's a very popular topic because it increased the productivity and efficiency a lot for our life and society. However, it also raised some controversial issues. For example, where is the line between our privacy and the data collection? How will the data be properly used and collected? The forum would invite participants to generate discussion, and is also going to launch a guideline for AI ethics to regulate the AI technology development. Well, the forum is also going to host a contest between startups. Hundreds of startups, both in China and outside of China, are going to compete for cash prizes with a total number of 1 million RMB. That is about 150,000 US dollars. actually the top winners could also get funding and even the property or policy support from the Beijing government to develop their ideas. And many startups emerged in China from this forum and developed into mature high-tech companies. And in many industries like the fintech, biotech, blockchain, and even private space travel. Therefore, we can see that the Zhongguancun Forum is just to create an ecosystem for China's high-tech companies. And that's also echoes with China's national policy. That is to encourage the science and the technology innovation and development.
Here's what's still to come on Africa Live when we return. Libya's head of the Presidency Council warns of possible conflict if credible elections are not held in December.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. The head of Libya's Presidency Council, Mohamed Al-Menfi, has warned that Libya will fail and relapse into division and armed conflict if credible elections are not held in December as planned. CGTN's Joy Kirukujuma reports.
It is at the UN General Assembly in New York that the head of Libya's Presidency Council, Mohamed Al-Menfi, announced that Libya was at a critical juncture.
This is a defining moment. We either succeed in democratic transition by means of a free, fair and transparent elections, the results of which are acceptable to all, then move towards a sustained stability and prosperity, or we fail and relapse into division and armed conflict.
Libya has been ravaged by a decade-long crisis. In 2014, Eastern and Western factions split Libya in two. An internationally recognized government was formed in Tripoli and a rival administration formed in the east. To set the country on the right path, the UN-selected assembly, the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, developed a plan for peace through installing a unity government. National elections are planned for December 24, but the country has been embroiled in bitter arguments over legitimacy.
Libya has received several international initiatives and proposals in an attempt to resolve the crisis. None has enjoyed the necessary conditions for success.
To build support for Libya's stability, Menfi has reiterated his plan to host an international conference in October to discuss political, economic, security and military issues.
The initiative aims at ensuring the continuation of international support in a unified, consistent, coherent manner according to a comprehensive national vision. The conference will be attended by relevant international bodies and institutions and regional and international partners.
It is a call for peace and a smooth transition to restore Libya to its former glory. Joy Kirukujuma, CGTN.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris met with Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo on Thursday. The meeting was held at the White House, where the two leaders discussed bilateral ties between their countries. Here's CGTN's Wanja Mungai with that story.
The discussions between U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo touched on key issues, starting with the historical ties between the two countries.
Our official bilateral relationship began in 1957, but of course there are longer and longer-standing ties that connect the people of our nations. Over the years, many Americans have traveled to Ghana to remember the history of slavery and to honor their roots and understand their ancestry.
Harris announced that the U.S. would continue supporting Ghana in its fight against COVID-19. It will donate 1.3 million Pfizer vaccines to the West African nation soon. The U.S., which is part of the WHO's COVAX facility, had recently donated 1.2 million doses of Moderna vaccines to Ghana. In his address to world leaders at the UN General Assembly on Thursday, President Akufo-Addo said economies in Africa had been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. He called for greater funding for global health systems.
We're grateful for the support that the United States government has given us in trying to deal with the virus, the COVAX facility, which America has been very strongly participant, and the support that we've had through the donation of the 1.2 million doses of the Moderna and the promise you've made that more is on the way. Yeah. Our target is to try and vaccinate at least 20 million of our people by the end of this year.
The Ghanaian leader also called for U.S. support in dealing with the jihadist insurgency in the Sahel. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
The African Union mission in Somalia, along with the Somali National Army, have launched a joint operations coordination center in the capital, Mogadishu. The center is expected to strengthen ongoing efforts to degrade al-Shabaab extremists and stabilize Somalia. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
The Mogadishu-based Intelligence and Operations Center will be manned jointly by the AU forces and the Somali National Army. The center has been set up to enhance joint planning and coordination of military operations against the al-Shabaab militant group.
The success of these centers will depend on the relationship of the two headquarters of SNA and AMISOM and how they coordinate in delegating work to the sectors, which then execute any such directives for successful execution and implementation.
The center in Mogadishu is one of 6 recently established across Somalia.
We will be jointly planning, coordinating and synchronizing current and future operations together. And therefore, we will be able to optimize the utilization of combat support and combat service support together as we plan for our operations.
Recent operations to degrade al-Shabaab in southern Somalia resulted in the militants losing ground against AMISOM and the Somali security forces.
For effective conduct of any operations, planning is the most critical. Therefore, I want to take this opportunity to thank the SNA leadership and the AMISOM leadership for this very wonderful initiative of establishing the joint operations coordination cells in all the sectors.
AMISOM pledged to continue supporting the Somali National Army to undertake security operations and end the insecurity in Somalia. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more news, including the latest in sport. But for now, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Crude prices are holding near the highest level since 2018 amidst a global energy crisis. And Nigeria is thinking about more debt sales after it raises $4 billion in fresh Eurobonds.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in the world of commodities. Oil held gains near the highest since 2018 amid a global energy crunch that's set to increase demand for crude, while stockpiles are in decline from the United States all the way to China. Futures in London are trading above $77 a barrel, heading for the third consecutive weekly increase. The surge in natural gas prices is also expected to force some consumers to switch over to oil, tightening the market even further ahead of the winter season in the Northern Hemisphere. Oil has rallied recently after a period of COVID-induced demand uncertainty, with some of the world's largest traders and banks predicting that prices could climb even further due to the energy crisis. OPEC Plus is struggling to boost production after agreeing to start further easing output curbs starting in the month of August. Zambia's government, in the meantime, says that talks to the International Monetary Fund in Washington on Thursday were, as they put it, very progressive, as the Southern African nation is looking for funding that it needs to solve a crippling debt crisis. Key issues include timelines and immediate steps that needed to be taken to advance the process for a highly anticipated extended credit facility program. In November, Zambia became the first African country to default on its sovereign debt during the pandemic after it failed to keep up with some payments on nearly $13 billion worth of international debt. Newly installed President Hakainde Hichilema has committed his government to reducing the fiscal deficit and restoring economic growth in Africa's second largest copper producer. In West Africa, Nigeria has raised another $4 billion through Eurobonds. The West African oil producer issued the debt in 3 tranches of different tenors. It included a $1.25 billion 7-year note at a yield of 6.125% and a 12-year note at a yield of 7.37%. That raised $1.5 billion. The final tranche has a 30-year duration. It raised $1.25 billion. The yield on that particular note was 8.25%. The note is set September 28th, for the bond settlement. It will be listed on bourses in London and Nigeria. Now, the Eurobonds are part of Africa's largest economy's plan to raise some $5.7 billion in external debt to help fund its 2021 budget and partly finance its $13 billion fiscal deficit for the year. South African Airways, the country's national carrier, resumed operations on Thursday, nearly a year after it was grounded because of the pandemic and the business rescue process that came into effect soon thereafter. Here's Angela Coppola with that story.
The airline restarted with a limited local offering, with 3 flights per week between Johannesburg and Cape Town.
A big chunk of whether they will be successful or not will depend upon whether the new management actually has a mandate to be able to operate independently and commercially. At this point of time, they've made the right noises about bringing in a private sector partner, but that has not yet come into play.
The timing of the re-entry of the airline into the regional market is critical.
The biggest thing that is working in their favor is going to be the restructuring of the route network and hopefully trimming of the costs. The new route network that they're starting with is only going to be with 4 aircraft, and it's going to be to a bunch of destinations that have traditionally been very lucrative for South African Airways. That's Lusaka, Maputo, Harare, Kinshasa, and Accra.
The battle now begins for the hearts and minds of the traveling consumer, after more than $1 billion in taxpayers' bailouts.
So changing that perception and making the public aware that this is something new. There have been very, very problematic labor relations at South African Airways towards the end. And, once again, these are all things which have negatively affected the brand, and that the new airline, which is still using the same brand, is going to need to have to overcome before they're able to win flyers back.
It appears that there are some travellers prepared to give SAA another chance.
Because it's a proudly South African company, I rather support our own. In the past, I used to fly SAA all the time, whether, nationally and internationally. So I am concerned, but I just want to see, what's going to happen.
So I think going with them, giving them our support, and we're very patriotic people. So I think they're going to take off and it's going to be a good future. Everybody has a wobble. I think they'll recover nicely.
SAA took to the skies with a limited offering, first domestically and then regionally. It's all going to depend now on whether there's any interest from consumers. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN at OR Tambo International Airport in South Africa.
Let's head outside the continent now. China is selling the first batch of state oil reserves through a public auction to help stabilize crude prices. Nearly 7.4 million barrels of bonded crude oil reserves were released into the market on Friday. China started its national oil reserve program some 15 years ago. According to the country's Statistics Bureau, the country built 9 bases as of 2017 that could hold some 37 million tons of crude. Analysts say the first batch is a relatively small amount, but as the National Reserve continues to release oil on a regular basis as promised, the move could stabilize the market in the long run and ease the burden on domestic firms. And finally, China is getting closer to the top 10 on the global list of most innovative economies. It now ranks 12th on the latest Global Innovation Index. It's also the only middle-income country in the top 30. Last year, China invested $372 billion in research and development. That accounted for about 2.4% of the country's demand for goods and services. The number not only marks a near-decade high in growth, but also reflects the country's efforts in catching up with international standards. The government says that by 2025, patent-intensive industries, think of tech, for example, and the copyright industry, should ideally account for 13% and 7.5% of GDP, respectively. It also says that China's export and import of intellectual property rights will get to around $54 billion, with the number of high-value patents increasing to 12 for every 10,000 people in the country. And I'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. We'll be heading over to Zimbabwe. When we return, authorities there threatening yet again to crack down on the parallel currency market. In formal markets, the Zimbabwean dollar is weakened by around 6% against the American dollar, but the gap between the official rate and the parallel one has widened considerably. But realistically, what can authorities do to kill off the parallel market without killing off growth and investment in a heavily import-dependent economy? We'll have some answers for you at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back
some
to
very pertinent questions there, Rama. We look forward to that. We'll see you in a bit. Well, let's now take a short break and return. We shine the spotlight on another remarkable African woman making a positive contribution in Ethiopia.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
We head over to Ethiopia, where a visually impaired woman is impairing others like her by giving them lessons on information technology. She's working under an institute called Together, which supports visually impaired people through different courses. And for the next 3 months, it's focusing on women. Koleta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Computer lessons are in session. Beza takes the female students on the basics. Just like her, they are visually impaired.
First, we have a duty to create an awareness for our society. How to using for computer for visual impaired or especially women's, as well as the society has duty to visit and understand to using for this computer visual impaired.
Beza is a lawyer by profession, but for now she is using her skills to uplift fellow women.
It's important because it is easily to using for computer, writing or other using internet. So many purposes, you know, computer is very, very important material. So our for the future, these women will be join university.
Her lessons are also improving the self-esteem of these women.
If I learn computer, my work will be easier because instead of asking people for help, I can write and learn things on my own, and I can achieve great things.
I love these studies because it helps me to know a lot and it connects me to technology.
The institute that has employed Beza is called Together. It offers transport to the students to enable them make it for their classes. The organization currently offers free computer lessons to 150 visually impaired women. Some of them take their lessons in the morning hours and others in the afternoon. Martha, who has worked here for 8 years, says this year the focus is intentionally on women.
People also, they didn't understand them well. Even a lot of people, they didn't think visually impaired, they are attending computers. But still they are attending, they can do everything what they want by computers, internet, everything they can access, they can work. But if we are not going to give them this opportunity, still, they will stay at home. That's not good. So that's why always we are focusing to women.
Beza wants to become a judge or a prosecutor one day. But before this time comes, she says she is determined to support as many fellow women as she can. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Time for a short break and return your sports news, including South Africa's Springboks ready to lock horns with bitter rivals New Zealand All Blacks in Rugby Championship showdown.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Let's delve into the world of sport now. We begin with rugby. South Africa and New Zealand will lock horns in the 100th test match between the two proud rugby nations in the first encounter since their World Cup clash in Japan 2 years ago. It was the Springboks' only defeat of the campaign. The arch-rivals now meet again in a mouth-watering rugby championship on Saturday. CGTN DSTV has more.
The biggest rivalry in world rugby takes centre stage this weekend as the reigning world champions take on the former three-time World Cup winners in what is always a special occasion.
I think playing against the All Blacks is obviously one of a dream for every youngster. You get to test yourself against the best of the world. Doesn't matter where it is, but obviously playing the 100th game against them is even so much bigger. Yeah, and it's special facing the haka. I think a lot of people ask you, is it intimidating? And obviously maybe a little bit, but I think for myself it was more something that psyched me up, something that I looked forward to getting just stuck into the boys and make my mark and play against obviously best of the world and show what I can do.
The Springboks are under pressure after back-to-back defeats to the Wallabies, but when the men in green and gold have their backs to the wall, they're at their most dangerous.
We always play our best against them. Because of the rivalry and how long it's been going on and all that. So I think the boys will definitely step up this weekend. I don't think it's going to be easy. They've picked a really good side, a well-balanced side. So I think it's going to be a tough one between strength, dominating collisions and obviously throwing the ball around a little bit and move it to the edges.
The 100th meeting promises to deliver a physical, closely fought contest with neither side prepared to give an inch to their opponents during the 80 minutes. The All Blacks do boast 59 wins in the previous 99 contests and are overwhelming favourites. But the #1 ranked team in world rugby can ill afford to write off the wounded Springboks, who'll be out to produce a response following their disappointing defeat last weekend and remind the world why the defending World Cup champions are still very much a force to be reckoned with. CGTN, Pretoria, South Africa.
The second round of the 2022 African Under-20 Women's World Cup qualifying tournament kicks off this weekend with Kenya hosting Uganda in Nairobi in one of the Saturday fixtures. The Uganda Under-20 team arrived in Kenya on Thursday morning while the hosts stepped up final training at the Nyayo National Stadium where the match is to be played. Kenya's preparations for the two-legged knockout qualifier started off with a selection exercise on the 15th of September under the tutelage of Harambee Starlets coach Charles Okeria. The squad has since been trimmed to 30 players. The winner of the tie on aggregate will face the winner of the second round tie, pitting Mozambique against South Africa in the third round. Both teams are confident of victory ahead of the showdown.
We as a team, the Kenya team, we are ready to work. We've trained for a long time. It's like a month is going. It's like almost a month. So we've been training. The coaches have been giving us the instructions. We've been following through. So we are mentally, physically, and psychologically prepared. We're ready to face the toughness and the opposition from the opponents. So our mentality is we are ready to win the match.
I've seen some of the players as individuals, but not as a team. We are ready. I'm saying as Team Uganda, we are ready to win the game on Saturday.
A total of 40 out of 54 CAF member national teams entered the qualifying round for the 2022 African Under-20 Women's World Cup qualifying tournament in a draw conducted in Cairo in May, with 16 now left in the competition. The two finalists in the fifth and final round will represent Africa at the Women's Under-20 World Cup in Costa Rica from the 10th to the 28th of August next year. Here's a brief look at this weekend's African second round fixtures. We turn to the English Premier League now, where champions Manchester City traveled to London to face Chelsea on Saturday in the early kickoff. The highlight fixture of the weekend at Stamford Bridge could set the tone for the title race, as CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy now reports.
Champions Manchester City face daunting away trips to Chelsea, PSG and Liverpool over the course of 8 days in the kind of run that defines true champions. Pep Guardiola takes his EPL title holders to Stamford Bridge, keen to learn from last season's defeats to Chelsea in the league and the final of the UEFA Champions League.
We prepare the game like we prepare Southampton and before and in the previous games, try to read what they are, what we have done in the recent games against Chelsea under Tuchel, and try to, to every game is a new challenging opportunity to improve, to learn, and to do it better.
Chelsea coach Thomas Tuchel, on the other hand, has played down his rivalry with Guardiola and significance of his team's upcoming clash against Manchester City.
Not so long ago, there were like a lot of voices who told me that I don't know how to beat Pep. So anyway, it's not between me and him. We don't play a match of tennis or a match of chess tomorrow. We play with our teams, and the teams and clubs compete against each other on a very high level. If I look at it, honestly, I see at the last 3 games, I see 3 50-50 matches. And I'm not only talking about the situation before the match, if it was a 50-50, but during the matches, I felt like it was 50-50 matches.
Despite the significance of the game in this season's title equation, both managers are keen to stress that the result will not determine the ultimate destination of the trophy in a league with so much quality.
I think the Premier League has to be so proud, the UK, and for the fantastic league that we have, for a brilliant, I spoke for my contenders, for my colleagues, so brilliant managers, but honestly brilliant in many sense, in all the clubs, and top quality players in every, but not just 11, 12, every squad they have 15, 16, 17 exceptional players.
Let's be honest, if we win tomorrow, we will not be crowned as champions, and if City wins tomorrow, they will not be the champions, and we will not be in depression. it's an important match, of course, and it's a big match, and it's a match in which we like to be involved on that kind of level, and the situation in which we face this match is a good one because we worked hard for it, and we feel ready for this kind of competition, and we are very well aware what it takes to have the opportunity to beat them once again.
Senegal goalkeeper Edouard Mendy has recovered from a hip problem and will start for Chelsea on Saturday, with City expected to bring most of the players rested for the Carabao Cup midweek. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
5 of the top 6 are in action on Saturday, with joint leaders Liverpool rounding off the day's program with a visit to high-flying promoted Brentford. Cristiano Ronaldo and his third-place Manchester United seek to banish 2 successive losses in the Champions League and Carabao Cup when they host Aston Villa. Everton in 6th are at home to basement side and winless Norwich City. Ukrainian challenger Alexander Usyk has dismissed concerns that he did not possess the size and strength to take out world heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua, saying he hoped he could help create a big night in boxing history. The Briton will put his IBF, WBA and WBO belts on the line on Saturday against the undefeated Usyk, a former cruiserweight who is 18-0 in his professional career. While new to the heavyweight division, Usyk tore through the cruiserweight class after turning pro 8 years ago.